UFC Vegas 53. I'm going to give you my final picks. I'm going to give you some props that we need to attack, and later in the video, we're going to build some lineups together, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. If you you're just walking through? All right. If you haven't already, go back and watch the video from earlier in the week. That's where we go over the slate fighter by fighter, salary by salary. We talk about spots that we like and spots that we don't like. For this final picks video, we're going to look at any changes that have come to the card. I've changed my mind on a couple of spots this week that I really want to dissect for you. And we're going to go over lineup construction, general strategy, and what we need to do to be successful this week. Now, the first change we have to this slate is we have the Alexandr Romanov Chase Sherman fight that was stolen from us last week. A part of me feels like Chase Sherman thought he was going to get away with it. He thought he was going to be able to avoid this fight, but no, we have it now. We have it this week, and Alexandr Romanov is still priced at 9,600, and he looks like a stone cold lock, of course. My only worry for Romanov this week is that Chase Sherman decides to pull out moments before the fight starts. That's really my only concern for him. That's the only way I don't see him winning this week. Now, Romanov is one of the biggest favorites in UFC history this week, and obviously we always want to do our best to attack favorable matchups, but from a game theory standpoint, I may suggest staying away from him this week. Here's why. This matchup is almost too good. Now, I don't mean that this is a sneaky underdog spot for Sherman, but I see Sherman providing so little resistance that Romanov finishes him after securing only one takedown. If we look at what Jake Collier did to Chase Sherman, if we have a similar outcome, you're going to be in a really bad spot. The reason I say this is because when Chase Sherman fought Jake Collier, Collier was able to take him down quickly, find the submission early, and he scored 105 Draftkings points, which was great at 8,500 salary. But if we get a similar performance from Alexandr Romanov, it's not going to be enough at his price point. So Alexandr Romanov is very pricey this week, and if he scores less than 110 fantasy points, then he's forcing you to play some underdogs you don't feel great about, and he's also going to come in at 66, 70, 80% ownership in most of your contests. And I know there are a lot of close fights on this card. I do think that a lot of underdogs are going to come through. I think this week is an all dogs go to heaven kind of week. But at the same time, last week had a lot of close fights and only two underdogs won. You had Felipe Lins who won, and then you had Mike Jackson who was given the win because of a disqualification. So realistically, if that fight continued, Felipe Lins is the only underdog that wins. So understand that if you're playing Romanov this week, you're probably stuck playing somebody like Brito, Candelario, Mike Breeden, just people that you don't feel great about. You might be able to make it work if you play 4 underdogs, but that's something that you're probably not going to want to do either. And lastly, who knows if Chase Sherman is going to have a minor health issue again and pull out moments before he's supposed to take the walk. I feel like that's still on the table. So while I think if you click this button up here at 9,600, you're definitely rostering the safest play of the card, but I'm not certain that he's the wisest play. But we're still going to play with some lineup combinations later in the video using Romanov, so make sure you watch until the end. And it may work out for you because, again, all dogs go to heaven this week, and we have a decent amount of value at 8,000 and below, and that brings us to our next point, which are the value plays starting at 8,000. Francisco Figueiredo is our first value play this week at 8,000. He's fighting Daniel da Silva, Daniel Lacerda. He goes by many names. And I've gone back and forth on this fight throughout the week. I've even had some of you reach out on Twitter and say, hey, I think Lacerda's going to kick his ass. And I think there are a lot of things to like about da Silva this week. I like the aggression. I like the opening round that he's going to bring. But what I like even more are the takedowns, jiu-jitsu, experience, and steadiness coming from the Figueiredo side. We saw Daniel da Silva fall off a cliff in his last fight against Jeff Molina, and we also saw that he didn't really respond to the punches all that well. Now, Figueiredo isn't the most dangerous striker in the world, but he could end up outlanding da Silva, especially if this fight does go later, it does get extended. And if da Silva is totally gassed after the first round, it's going to be all Figueiredo for rounds 2 and 3. I also expect Figueiredo to have the advantage on the ground, even if he's the one taken down. I expect him to reverse position, find himself on top, and maybe even find a submission if he ends up in a dominant position on the mat. And I also think that the perception of this guy is a lot worse than it actually needs to be, considering that his brother's a champion, kind of like Michael Jordan's son playing basketball kind of deal. But he's his own man. He is UFC caliber. He is a solid fighter, and I think he gets the job done here, securing takedowns, control time, possible submission threat if this fight does get extended, and I think that builds value into his $8,000 price tag. And on top of that, I do expect him to go pretty low owned. Not the lowest owned of the value plays that we're going to talk about, but I don't think a lot of people are going to be clicking this button. I think Francisco Figueiredo gets it done this week. Now, our next value play, he has a name, but if you wanted to find some more evidence on him, you could just open up your dictionary and find the word scrappy, because that's exactly what Marlon Vera is. Maybe the scrappiest, cagiest fighter on the roster, at least in the division. And this is a fight that we've been waiting for. Not exactly Marlon Vera versus Rob Font, although it's a sick matchup. More so just main event Marlon. We've been waiting for Marlon to get his opportunity at 5 rounds. I thought we were going to get it when he beat Sean O'Malley. And then he had the 3-rounder against Jose Aldo, which was a snooze fest. But he follows that up with a decision win over Davey Grant, where he scores almost 100 DraftKings points in a 3-round decision. And then he KOs Frankie Edgar, Anderson Silva style, with that front kick in the 3rd round, scoring again almost 100 DraftKings points in 3 rounds. And I do think this is a close fight one way or the other. I think that you're going to have to roster both of these guys if you're playing cash games. That makes the most sense. But there are a few things that I like about Marlon Vera that I think will make huge differences in this fight against Rob Font. I think he's got the better leg kicks. I think he's got the better knees and elbows when this fight does hit the pocket and gets in close. I think he's going to be the one landing with a bit more power. I think that he's going to carry his power better later into the fight than Rob Font will. And I think that he has a slight grappling advantage if this fight does hit the ground. And Rob Font does shoot for takedowns now and again. Now, we all know that Chito is a notoriously slow starter. I don't think there's any situation where he wins the 1st round. He probably drops the 2nd round as well. So if you have access to live betting, hammer that line after the 2nd round, because he's going to be plus 1,200 at that point. But I don't see a situation where he loses rounds 3, 4, and 5. I just don't. And I say that because of the reasons that I mentioned before, those slight advantages that he has in those areas, but also Rob Font is very, very good after he's able to get his jab going. But if you take away Rob Font's jab, that takes away his entire offense. Everything comes from that jab. The timing, the combinations, the distance management, the winning minutes, everything comes from Rob Font's jab. And we saw Font in his last fight. It was a 5-round fight against Jose Aldo, where Jose Aldo won literally every round because he was able to nullify that jab. He was doing a great job of dipping his shoulder in and crashing in the pocket. He was also doing a great job of slipping and ripping to the body when he needed to. And on the ground, he was just leagues above him. He was able to control him pretty easily. And I expect Chito's fight IQ to be high enough to recognize that he needs to take care of that jab early and often so that it doesn't let Rob Font do whatever he wants. And I think from there, he gives him serious problems. And I'm really not worried about Chito eating shots early, because while Rob Font has power, he wasn't able to knock out Cody Garbrandt, and I believe that was a 5-round fight as well. So if you're not knocking out Cody Garbrandt, there's no situation where you're knocking out Chito Vera. This guy has a granite chin and is a junkyard dog. There's no way that he's going to finish Chito. I think Chito takes rounds 3, 4, and 5, maybe finishes him in rounds 4 or 5, but I think Chito by decision is the most likely outcome here. I really like that bet this week. And if you want to take Marlon Vera by knockout, you're looking at plus 450, but again, I think you can get similar odds if you just wait till the end of the 1st or 2nd to bet him live. But Chito Vera by knockout is plus 450, and if you wanted to kind of hedge it with a Font by decision, you're looking at plus 165, so you'll be okay if you place both of those bets. You'll be in the green if one of those things happen. But at 7,900, I do expect him to be the higher owned of the two, but I think it's for good reason. 5 rounds to work, obviously a very high scoring ceiling. He can mix it up. I think he's the more talented fighter. I think that Rob Font's a little bit more technical, tight, and crisp, but I think that Marlon Vera is just a better fighter overall. So give me Marlon Vera at 7,900. Now, before we get into our next value play, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something in the comments, anything. You know how the algorithm works. If you think that the Birds had the best draft out of any team in the 1st round yesterday, put that in the comments. But now we're moving on to our next value play, which is Yohan Lainesse. He's making his UFC debut against Gabe Green. He's 7,700, and I do expect him to pick up the knockout win in this spot. The more that you dig into this, the more that you find a lot of weird things happening with Gabe Green, like heart issues, he's getting like eye surgery or whatever it is, just a lot of question marks. And normally I'm not the guy to focus on things that are happening outside of the cage, but these are things that are really affecting his ability to train and train consistently. Meanwhile, you have Yohan Lainesse, who's making his way into the UFC. I know it says 0-0 here, but if you do your research, you'll find out this guy's 8-0, undefeated, and hits like a truck. Gabe Green gets touched washed up in almost every fight that he has, and I think that Yohan Lainesse lands heavier than anybody Gabe Green has ever fought, and I think that we're going to see him pick up a first-round knockout in this spot. If he does lose, then he's probably the one getting finished, but I think that with his knockout upside, I need to roster him. I suggest that you roster him, because if he does win, you'll absolutely need him on your lineup. Yohan Lainesse will not win a decision here. Yohan Lainesse is not going to score anything less than 95 points if he does win. So I think that just because of his win condition, you have to roster him. You have to take a shot. At least in my opinion, I know that I'll have him in my single entry. I really like this price as well. Our next value play is a spot that I've actually changed my mind on. So earlier in the week, I was looking at Grant Dawson. I was thinking that Grant Dawson is an excellent play. He's only 8,700. Jared Gordon's got 50% takedown defense. Grant Dawson should be able to get him down, land some ground and pound, control him on the ground, and find his way to a decision where he scores a decent amount of points because of the takedowns and control time. However, when you look at Grant Dawson's last two performances, they really weren't that impressive. Grant Dawson was literally 1 second away from losing his fight against Leonardo Santos. And then his next fight against Rick Glenn, which is the last fight that he was in, you're looking at a situation where he's supposed to just steamroll Ricky Glenn. Instead, he gasses out, and then in the third round, he gets 10-8'd, resulting in a draw. And what that showed us more than anything is that when he's the person that's dictating the pace, getting the takedowns, he's a monster. He looks unbeatable. But when he's the person being taken down, when he's the person who's getting controlled on the ground, he really doesn't have much of an answer. And he's kind of one of these guys that when he gets tired, he's accepting positions. You're talking flat on the back, close up the guard. And Jared Gordon is a savvy, tough guy. Now, if Jared Gordon gets knocked out in the first round, then yeah, you're looking at a situation where you wish you wouldn't have played him. But Grant Dawson's not that guy. Grant Dawson is a grinder who needs to be able to get going. He needs to get his wrestling going. He needs to get in a dominant position. He's not going to spark him on the feet. And again, Jared Gordon only has 50% takedown defense. That's why I was all over Grant Dawson. But when you dig a little bit deeper, Grant Dawson has 40% takedown defense. And we know that if he's getting taken down in the third round, he's not going to try to get back up. Jared Gordon is always getting takedowns outside of when he's been knocked out early in fights. He's also getting reversals and sweeps, which I think is really on the table here against Grant Dawson, and that can help with the DraftKings scoring as well. You can expect them to have much better output. I mean, 241 strikes against Chris Fishgold, 138 strikes against Danny Chavez in a fight where he was taken down himself, 171 strikes here. So you're looking at a situation where Jared Gordon is going to have better output. He's probably going to get takedowns on his own. He's probably going to execute some reversals or sweeps if he does get taken down early. And Grant Dawson might become one of the more popular plays on the card. So you're looking at a situation where I expect Jared Gordon to come in at super low ownership. Gordon might be a better play than Yohan Lainesse now that I'm thinking about it in terms of safety, in terms of ownership. I could totally see Grant Dawson stealing the first round, but if Jared Gordon is making him work, especially if Jared Gordon gets a takedown in the first round, I think 2 and 3 are definitely going to go to Flash, and I think that the over 2.5 rounds that currently sits at about minus 220 is the safest way to approach this, but I do like Jared Gordon. I think he's solid value at 7,500, and I think he's going to come in at sneaky low ownership. Next is somebody that I've been on all week, Gerald Meerschaert. This is more just not playing Krzysztof Jotko, if I'm honest with you. Krzysztof Jotko has got to be the least intimidating middleweight on the roster. I think that Gerald Meerschaert gives him trouble. I think that Gerald Meerschaert is able to clinch him up against the fence, shuck him down to the ground, get the hooks in, and find the rear naked choke at some point. Now, to me, it's kind of tough to want to play Gerald Meerschaert just because we have seen him get pretty sloppy in the past. We saw him one-tapped by Khamzat Chimaev. And for as much as I don't like Krzysztof Jotko, I know how solid he is. Like, Krzysztof Jotko is like the Toyota Camry of the middleweight division. And Gerald Meerschaert is more like a Pontiac. Like, they don't make him like him anymore, and sometimes they'll surprise you. But in terms of finishing upside, which is really what we're trying to capture more than anything when it comes to DraftKings MMA, I think the higher chance of a finish is definitely on the side of Gerald Meerschaert this week. I don't think that he wins a decision against Krzysztof Jotko, who is a decision machine, but I do think that he submits him at some point. That builds value into his price. I don't know who the better fighter is, but I know who's got the better chance of finishing this fight, which is why I have GM3 here in the value plays. I do expect him to win this fight. I do expect him here at 7,400 to be a decent value play, and I might get him in some of my my lineups, but again, I think that Jared Gordon and Marlon Vera are really separating themselves from the pack. And outside of those few, I'm not really crazy about the remaining underdogs. I know earlier in the week I was on Shanna Young. I thought that maybe she can outlast Gina Mazany for the first round and then put it on her after, but I think Mazany is so much better in terms of grappling in that opening round that we might not even see the second. I actually think the same thing about Money Mike, who I chose earlier in the week. I think same logic applies here. I think Natan Levy is a much better grappler and can finish this fight, and I'm also not worried about Natan Levy's gas tank. I think it's better than Mike Breeden, so if we're looking at the better grappler, we're looking at somebody with a better gas tank, it makes a lot of sense to go the Natan Levy route instead. Carlos Candelario, I think he's getting fed to the new kid. I think that Joanderson Brito is just completely outgunned here in terms of fight IQ, experience. And then Chase Sherman, I mean, if you are playing Chase Sherman in your lineups, if whatever contest you're in, let's say it's $100 single entry, if you decide that you want to play Chase Sherman in your lineups, what you should do, you should withdraw your entry from that contest and just send me the $100 because you're wasting it anyway. Now, what I think we need to do to be successful this week, I think it's extremely important, is for us to realize that we don't need to play Romanov up here. Listen, it's 70% ownership across the board in most of your contests. If he scores his average of 109.7, like we said earlier in the video, anything less than 110 does not get the job done at this price point. I think that it's the safest way for you to get different, and I think it makes a lot of sense to not play Romanov. Again, I'm going to build some lineups with him in just a second just so we can get an idea, but if you don't get here, you're automatically getting different, and that's going to push you closer to the top of your contest, I assure you. Andrei Fili, he's probably going to decision. He probably scores 70 points. I don't expect him to blow the doors off of Joanderson Brito. I could actually see Brito winning a round. And what's crazy is if you took Andrei Fili by decision, right now it's plus 130, which is really good, but Joanderson Brito by submission is plus 1400, which is absurdly high. Grappling is his strong suit, and if he does win this fight, it probably is by way of submission. That's a situation where you could play both sides. I think the smart approach this week is to stop up here at 9200. If you want to play Tatsuru, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that he's live for a finish. It is the first fight of the night, and nothing's worse than you sitting there with your lineups, watching the first fight of the night blow the doors off his opponent and sitting there thinking, well, I've already lost. So if you wanted to get here, that makes a lot of sense. Now, there are question marks about the kid. Obviously, he's fighting somebody who's just as experienced, although I think Tatsuru does have better experience. So if you're feeling a little suspicious about him, I understand. Personally, I think what I want to do more than anything is I want to grab somebody like Natan Levy, and I also think I want to grab Gina Mazany. Now, it doesn't leave you with a whole lot in terms of average remaining salary, but let's go ahead and go down to these value plays that we liked earlier and see what we could do. If you wanted to have kind of a two underdog approach, so you took Flash Gordon, you took Chito Vera, now we're at 8350 remaining salary. Now you could grab somebody like Andrei Arlovski, who I don't really recommend just because he doesn't score that many points, and then you're stuck playing either Daniel Da Silva, Figgy, or Rob Font if you wanted to stack in this lineup. So if you play Figueiredo, you have a situation where you have about 300 salary left over. At that point, you could come up from Andrei Arlovski and grab somebody like The Damage. Now your lineup is very different. You don't have Romanov, you don't have Tatsuru, you've left 100 salary on the table. This is a smart way to approach it in my opinion, especially because you have Darren Elkins, who we know can score a lot of points with those takedowns of his. So what you're looking at here is grappling advantage, massive grappling advantage, crazy pace, 5 rounds to work in Marlon Vera, sneaky play here with Flash Gordon at 7,500, and then Figueiredo, who again I think is going to come in at lower ownership than he probably should in a fight that he should probably win. Now, if you wanted to come down and you wanted to have kind of a 3 underdog type of construction and you wanted to come down to Yohan Lainesse, now you've got 400 salary left on the table, which at that point you could come off of Gina Mazany and get somebody like Tatsuru. That way you have a piece at the first fight and you have somebody with just as much finishing upside. I think this is a smart way to attack it as well. Or if you want to go back to Mazany and you're not really sold on Marlon Vera, you could come back here and this gives you just enough to be able to afford Rob Font. Now let's blow this up and let's look at a situation where we do want to play Romanov. Well, now we definitely have to go down here and find somebody that we like. Let's say we wanted to go super cheap and we wanted to go with GM3, we wanted to go with Flash Gordon, and we also thought that, hey, let's go the underdog route in the main event. And now you have 8,800 left over, so you're probably looking at a situation where, again, you're going to want to play Gina Mazany, and then you'll probably come back here to the damage, and you've got 100 left over. Because you're hoping that Gina Mazany gets it done, you're hoping that she finds the finish, or at least secures a lot of takedowns and scores highly like she has in the past. Obviously, Romanov blows the doors off of Chase Sherman, and then Darren Elkins is pushing a pace and has a high ceiling, as you know. Now you're just hoping for these 3 underdogs to come through for you. Now, if you wanted to, say, for example, take out Marlon Vera because you think that Rob Font is going to win, now you're going to have to start saving salary elsewhere. Well, now you're looking at a situation where you might want to come off of Mazany and then go grab Gabe Green, who is very live for a win here and very live for a finish. This is going to be a big step up in competition for Lainesse. I do prefer the Lainesse side just because of the knockout upside, but Gabe Green is a fine play, and I do think he comes in at lower ownership than, say, Grant Dawson, who's priced right next to him. So this is a way where you can play the main event favorite. You can play Alexandr Romanov. You have the salary to make it happen, and you have upside in other spots. This is a smart way to approach it. I do think this is a rather chalky way to approach it. Obviously, a lot of ownership on Rob Font being in the main event, and obviously a ton of ownership coming in for Alexandr Romanov. But even more than that, I expect from the underdogs Gerald Meerschaert to be one of the more popular underdogs on the slate. So this is a lineup that if you're in a contest with tens of thousands, maybe even thousands of people, say 1, 2, 3, 4,000 people, this is probably a lineup that you're going to see as well. I mean, even with, that's the fundamental issue with DraftKings MMA, is you oftentimes have the same lineup as everybody else, so you would want to try to get different where you can. I don't know if this lineup accomplishes that for you, but I do think this is a smart way to approach it. Now, if we wanted to take out Romanov just to make this lineup a little bit different, now there are some things you could do. You could grab Natan Levy. You got 700 salary left over. You can come off of Jared Gordon, who we had there, grab somebody like Yohan Lainesse. Now, obviously, you don't want Gabe Green, so you're going to take him out, and then you can come up to Gina Mazany. This is a smart way to approach it as well if you expect the main event to go Rob Font's way, and you're also avoiding the big Romanov play. And if you're not sold on Gerald Meerschaert, because you still have 100 salary left over, you can come down and grab Flash Gordon, and this is something that you can feel pretty good about. I mean, you probably can. Now, if you want to build a cash game lineup, obviously what you're going to do is grab the 2 fighters that are competing in the main event. You have 8,450 left over for each fighter, so you can do a lot of things with this. This puts you in a position where you're probably going to need just one other underdog. So again, I'm going to probably come down to somebody like Jared Gordon, who I like this week. You've got 8,766 left over. You can grab the damage, you can grab Gabe Green, and then you can come up here to Tatsuru. Or if you wanted to be a little safer, in my opinion, you can grab somebody like Natan Levy. Either way, you're looking at a situation where you've built your lineups the right way. If you want to come off of Darren Elkins because you think he's completely shot and you want to go with Krzysztof Jotko, I think the likelihood of him winning a decision is pretty good as well. The Jotko by decision line right now is at plus 180, so if you do think that Jotko wins, you might as well just take the decision prop because you know he's not going to do anything else. If we got rid of these guys and we wanted to build it a little bit differently, let's say you're not sold on that kind of lineup, then we can come down here and just grab guys that are probably going to win decisions that we can feel okay about. So you're looking at Jotko, you're looking at Andrei Arlovski, you're going to come down here and grab somebody like Gabe Green. Now you're stuck with 8,000 left, and that's when you go grab one of these underdog plays as well. Maybe somebody like Yohan Lainesse, maybe Francisco Figueiredo to round this out. It's just a situation where if you're playing these two in your cash game lineup, you can really do anything outside of that. You can build it any way that you want. You don't want to take flyers and leave 600 salary on the table in a cash game. Use all that salary that you can, but just make sure that you're stacking the main event and you're trying to focus on fighters who have a decent shot at winning, like Andrei Arlovski. I mean, this is the blueprint, right? If you just stack this up, you can do pretty much anything in these other 4 spots as long as you're not leaving salary on the table. I think that's the most intelligent way to approach this. Even if you wanted to take it a step further, let me show you. Get rid of all these guys down here, keep the stacked main event, and then come way down in the salary and grab somebody like Joanderson, Brito, who might get a takedown or two. He might put up a 36-point performance in a decision loss, but now we've got 8,900 left to spend. So we know we can come up here to Gina Mazany, we can come up here to Natan, Levy, we can grab Krzysztof, Jotko as well. That's not too bad. You've got 200 left over if you wanted to come off of Brito and see if you can grab somebody like Candelario, who might be able to get some takedowns as well. Either way, you're looking at a situation where as long as you're playing these two, then you're going to be okay. And if you want to just punt one completely, that makes sense as well. So now I'll give you a couple of straight bets. I will throw out some on Twitter as well during the event, like what I think the over-under prop is. I have them all on this piece of paper right here that you will not see. That's the secret formula. But I will throw some of them on Twitter for you, so make sure you follow Kunith MMA to see what those are. I think if you're trying to attack some props that make sense, like we mentioned before, there are a few out there. Some of my favorite props this week, you have Yohan Lainesse. This line may have moved since the last time I looked at it. Yohan Lainesse by KO is at plus 200. I think that makes a ton of sense. If we look at the Gina Mazany, Shanna Young fight, I think you can find Mazany by submission at plus 400, I think is pretty juicy. Krzysztof, Jotko, and Gerald Meerschaert. I know I mentioned the Jotko by decision prop earlier at plus 180, but you're also looking at GM3 by submission at plus 300, which is his most likely win condition, his most likely outcome, so that's a good one to attack as well. One line that I really like, especially with these guys' gas tanks, because both of them really aren't the best, is when you look at the over 2.5 rounds in the Figueiredo Lacerda fight. And right now it's sitting at minus 125. I think that's a really good spot as well. And also this, I mean, this is a lock in my opinion. This is like a women's MMA over kind of bet in the Andrei Arlovski versus Jake Collier fight, which is crazy because they're heavyweights. But if we come down here at minus 220, you've got the over 2.5 rounds. I think that makes a lot of sense. And lastly, I'll show you one more that I think is pretty good. If we look for the Andrei, Fili, Joanderson, Brito fight, we have the over 2.5 rounds currently sitting at minus 170. The other day was minus 185, so some money has come in on the under, but I think Andrei Fili wins. I think it's over 2.5 rounds. Andrei Fili by decision sits at plus 150 if you want to get a little bit more specific, but I think the over 2.5 rounds is probably the best way for you to attack this. Now, if we go down the whole card, I will give you my picks for each fight. I got the new kid, Tatsuru. I've got Gina Mazany, got Natan, Levy. First underdog, Yohan Lainesse. We've also got plus 100 odds on Francisco Figueiredo, minus 2,200 on Alexandr Romanov. Not even worth putting in your parlays at that price. I mean, that is crazy. If you want to do it, fine. I don't think that he's going to lose, but it's just, I mean, this is MMA and these odds are absurd. You've got Gerald Meerschaert at plus 140, who I really like. Darren Elkins at minus 170. This right here, Jared Gordon at plus 155, looks excellent. Andrei Fili at minus 260 is a little high for Andrei Fili in my opinion, but I do think that he's a much better fighter than Joanderson, Brito all around, especially in rounds 2 and 3. Pitbull, Andrei Arlovski, and then Marlon Vera, who the money continues to come in on Marlon Vera at plus 115. So we've got 12 fights, 12 picks, plus 75,000 odds if you hit that PRP. If you wanted to place, say, a $10 bet on this, you're looking at a $7,400 payout. We've done it before, all right? We've done it before. We can do it again. Will it be this week? Probably. Now, if you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much. Before you quickly click out of here, a couple of things. Make sure that you are using these bets if possible. If you have access to a sports book, make sure you're taking these bets to help offset what you're putting into Draftkings contests. Because it's important to understand that when you're playing these contests, whether it be large field, small field, if they are tournaments, very few people are getting paid in each of them. And we've seen a common theme on a lot of these cards where only 1 to 3 underdogs are actually winning. So the likelihood of you taking down these contests is obviously pretty low. We know that coming into it. That's why we play the game. But like we've talked about in strategy videos in the past, make sure that you're using cash games to offset what you're putting into tournaments. You can also use these straight bets that are much easier to hit than what you're putting into tournaments. Also, I know that we look at the juicy parlays, but if you just limit your parlays to 3 legs only, yeah, you're not going to get ridiculous, incredible odds that make us want to lay the money down, but straight bets are going to beat parlays in the long run every single time, and I'm telling you, at the end of the night, having the same amount of money than what you started with in your book than being all the way down to zero. It feels much better. You shouldn't be at zero at the end of every night. So keep that in mind as you're making your bets this week. I wish you all the best of luck. I thank you so much for watching. And if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way I can bring more of this to you.